The rain clung to the windshield like a veil as the Thomas family's aging Subaru crawled along the muddy country road, its tires slipping in and out of ruts from last week's spring storm. Sarah stared out the window, watching the trees blur into dripping shadows of green. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel jaw, set in stubborn silence. In the back seat, 10-year-old Emily slept with her head resting against the window, her breath fogging the glass. For once, her face was calm, peaceful, in a way Sarah hadn't seen in 3 long years. They were headed toward the cabin near Pinerest, a place heavy with childhood memories, long before grief fractured everything. The death of their son Michael had hollowed them out. Jack retreated to his workshop. Sarah drowned in photo editing and unspoken sorrow. Emily had become a ghost, trapped in the space where her brother's laughter used to echo. As the road narrowed into a ribbon of slick gravel, Jack cursed under his breath. "Should have brought the truck," he muttered. "We don't have a truck," Sarah replied, a flicker of old banter dancing across her tone. "Well, we should get one." The radio hissed and faded into static. Sarah turned it off, letting silence fill the car. Then Jack hit the brakes hard. The car jolted. Emily stirred, but didn't wake. "Jesus," Jack whispered. Lying ahead in the middle of the muddy road was a massive gray wolf. Blood matted its flank. One leg bent unnaturally. Its ribs moved barely, still breathing. Emily blinked awake. "Is it dead?" "No," Jack said, opening his door, "but it's not far from it." Sarah's instincts screamed to drive around to keep moving. Wild animals meant danger, especially wolves. But then quietly, a seatbelt clicked. Emily opened her door. "Emily, get back here." Jack shouted, already half out of the car. But she kept walking. Rain dotted her hair as she knelt a few feet from the wolf, her voice steady, strange. "He's dying," she said. "We have to help him." The wolf didn't growl. Its amber eyes met Emily's with a pain Sarah recognized too well. Grief raw and ancient, and just like that, something shifted. Emily had spoken her first clear sentence in months. Sarah and Jack exchanged a glance, wordless but heavy. This wasn't just about a wolf. This was about their daughter coming back to life. Emily stood as if rooted in something deeper than fear, deeper than reason. "Michael wouldn't leave it," she said. 4 words. Simple. Devastating. Jack looked down, jaw clenched. Sarah swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Michael had loved animals. Snakes, stray kittens, even raccoons. He would have pulled over without hesitation. They all knew it. "I'll get the emergency blanket," Jack muttered, already heading for the trunk. Together in stunned coordination, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher from the old blanket and their coats. Jack approached the wolf cautiously, speaking low and calm. The wolf didn't move, didn't even flinch. Too weak, or perhaps too wise to fight. They slid the blanket beneath him with aching slowness and lifted him into the back of the SUV. Emily climbed in, after settling beside the wolf's trembling body, with quiet determination. She ignored Sarah's protests, placing one small hand on the wolf's flank, as if anchoring it to life. "She hasn't touched anything with this much intent in years," Sarah whispered, standing by Jack, as he cracked the hatch slightly for air. "Yeah," he muttered. But a wolf. Why couldn't it be a turtle or something? They drove into Pinerest under gray skies and lingering silence, the wolf's shallow breaths audible in the back. The town hadn't changed. Same sagging general store, same peeling church bell tower. But Sarah saw it differently now, as a place where something might start, instead of a place they were running from. Inside the general store, the bell chimed as they entered. Mr. Henderson, older and softer than Sarah remembered, looked up from his paper. "Well, if it isn't the Thomases," he said gently. Sorry about your boy. Damn shame. Sarah's throat tightened. Thank you. We need help. There's a wolf in our car. It's hurt. His eyebrows lifted. A wolf. Voices stirred. A woman near the canned goods clutched her basket. A wolf. With children around. The tide turned quickly. Concern became fear. A man in a hunting vest growled, should have left it to die. But Emily didn't flinch. Behind the fogged-up glass, her hand still rested on the wolf's ribs, not letting go. Mr. Henderson leaned in, lowering his voice beneath the rising murmur. Doc Phillips retired last year, he said. But there's someone else. Eleanor Mackenzie. Lives on the edge of town. Knows more about healing than most doctors I've met. Eleanor, Sarah asked. Bit of an odd bird, he admitted, scribbling directions on a scrap of receipt paper. Some call her a witch. I call her observant. Outside, curious onlookers surrounded their car, pressing closer to glimpse the predator inside. Jack muttered, Great. Day one, and we're already the crazy city people who brought a wolf into town. Sarah glanced at Emily through the window, still calm, still present. We're just getting him help, she said. But even to herself, her voice lacked conviction. The road to Eleanor's cabin twisted through thickening trees. Moss crept up fence posts. Ferns spilled over gravel. When they reached the edge of the forest, a narrow path led to a weathered cabin surrounded by wild gardens and carved wooden animals peeking through the brush. A wolf sculpture stood beside the doorhead, tilted to the sky. That's not ominous at all, Jack muttered. Before they could knock, the door creaked open. Eleanor Mackenzie stood framed in the threshold silver braid flannel shirt, eyes so sharp they seemed to cut through years. You brought me quite a patient, she said without greeting or question. Sarah blinked. Henderson said he'd call you. He doesn't have service. Line's been dead since the storm, Eleanor replied. But I knew something was coming. Her gaze slid past them, locking on the SUV and Emily. With brisk authority, she ordered the wolf inside. The cabin smelled of herbs, pine, and fire. Bundles of dried plants hung from ceiling beams. Strange tools rested beside medical-grade equipment. A world of contradiction, old and new, primitive and precise. As Jack and Sarah lifted the wolf onto a central table, Eleanor's hands flew into motion. Broken femur, 3 ribs, lung puncture, blood loss, she murmured. He was hit hard. Jack nodded. Found him in the road. Couldn't leave him. Most would have, Eleanor replied, not unkindly. Her fingers never stopped moving. Most should have. Sarah bristled. We did what felt right. Eleanor paused, her expression unreadable. Right is often the first thing sacrificed when fear takes hold. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. You don't want to help him. Eleanor looked up from the tincture she was measuring. For a long breath, she studied the girl, not just her words, but her grief-worn eyes, the way her fingers fidgeted, but didn't flinch. I didn't say that, she replied. But I want you to understand, this isn't a stray dog you found on a sidewalk. This is a wild creature, unpredictable, instinctive, and utterly unlike anything you've ever known. Emily glanced at the wolf, still unconscious. Then why do you have a carving of one by your door? The silence deepened. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's hands stilled above the bowl. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter. To remind me of what I've lost. The conversation ended there. Eleanor sent Jack outside to fetch water from the pump, while Sarah helped clean the wolf's wounds. The pungent mixture of herbs filled the room, earthy and ancient. The animal groaned, faintly flinching, as Eleanor applied the paste. His strength was fading fast. He's afraid, Emily said, stepping closer, ignoring Sarah's protective reach. He's in pain. Pain and fear walk hand in hand, Eleanor murmured. For wolves, for people. Emily looked up. I used to be afraid of wolves. My brother Michael, he told me scary stories about them. Eleanor's features shifted. Something passed across her weathered face, a shadow that made her seem older still. I know something about that kind of loss, she said softly. Her gaze lingered on the wolf, then back to Emily. Sometimes the things we fear most are the very things that can heal us. Jack returned with the water. Eleanor directed him to set the broken leg. Sarah watched in quiet awe as his carpenter's hands moved with gentleness she hadn't seen in years. They worked together for hours, bandaging, stitching, wiping blood from thick fur. When it was done, Emily asked, "Will he live?" Eleanor sighed. "That's up to him now, and maybe to something bigger than us." She turned to Emily. "He'll need care, constant care. If he survives the night, we'll talk about what comes next." The wolf survived the night. When they returned to Eleanor's cabin at dawn, he was still alive barely, but his amber eyes tracked their movement with a haunted intelligence. Emily approached slowly, hand outstretched, heart thudding. Sarah held her breath, ready to pull her daughter back, but the wolf didn't growl. He sniffed her fingers, then astonishingly licked her palm. "Well, I'll be," Eleanor whispered. "He's chosen. Chosen what Jack asked, not what. Who?" Eleanor nodded toward Emily. "Wolves don't give their trust freely. But your daughter, she's been accepted." From that moment, a rhythm emerged. Each morning they drove from the lake cabin to Eleanor's. Emily would sit beside the recovering wolf for hours, reading aloud, or simply sitting in silence. Eleanor taught her about herbs wounds and watching without speaking. Jack, at first skeptical, found himself pulled into conversations about woodcraft, with Eleanor surprised at how much she knew about joinery and tool balance. Sarah roamed the forest with her camera capturing the unfolding spring. Her lens often returned to one subject, the quiet communion between her daughter and the wounded predator. Emily named him Shadow on the 10th day. "Because he follows me with his eyes," she explained, "everywhere I go." Shadow's recovery was slow but remarkable. The once broken leg grew stronger. His breathing eased. The dull matted fur began to shine in silver-gray swirls. He remained wary of Jack, tolerant of Sarah, but completely devoted to Emily. She brushed his coat. She whispered to him. Sometimes she just lay beside him in the grass, their breaths rising and falling in time. Eleanor watched them one afternoon and said, "Some animals see deeper than we do. They recognize wounded souls." By the 3rd week, Shadow was strong enough to move to the cabin. Mr. Henderson helped Jack build a spacious enclosure off the porch, secure, but open, shaded by pine and maple. It became Shadow's sanctuary, and slowly the Thomas family's too. They were laughing again, eating together. Emily had even made a new friend, Lily, Mr. Henderson's granddaughter, who visited often. Sarah caught herself smiling without guilt. Jack held her hand while watching the girls play. Something was mending. They were still grieving. But now they weren't doing it alone. But not everyone in Pinarest was charmed by Shadow. Whispers turned to tension. Frank Wilson, a hulking man with deep lines etched from years outdoors, cornered Jack outside the general store. No pretense, no pleasantries, just anger. "That animal is a killer," Frank growled. "You can't change that." Jack kept his voice level. "He's behind a fence. He's recovering. He hasn't hurt anyone. You named it like a dog. But it's not a dog. It's a wolf," Frank snapped. "My father had a flock North Ridge. One night wolves took 27 sheep, 2 dogs. My father lost the farm, drank himself to death before he turned 60. He stepped closer. Wolves destroy lives. Don't forget that while you're playing house with one." That night on the porch, Jack repeated the conversation to Sarah. Shadow lay dozing in the enclosure, bathed in soft moonlight. Inside, Emily sat on the sofa, nose deep in a book, a faint smile on her lips. "Maybe Frank's right," Jack said quietly. "We don't know what Shadow could do. What if something goes wrong?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Her eyes were on their daughter, this girl who had been a ghost for 3 years now, laughing with Lily, brushing Shadow's fur, asking questions about trees and stars. "It's like we got her back," she whispered. "But for how long? At what cost?" Then came the howls, not from Shadow, but from deep in the forest. First one, then several long and mournful. Shadow lifted his head, ears, pricked body still. His pack, Sarah breathed. "Maybe," Jack murmured. "Eleanor said there's a small wolf population trying to re-establish." Controversial. Shadow stood, slowly turned a full circle, then lay back down his head, resting on his paws. He didn't answer the call. "He's choosing to stay," Sarah said, almost in disbelief. "He's injured." Contained, Jack reminded her, but Sarah wasn't so sure. The way he responded to Emily, the patience in his eyes, the way he pressed his flank to her touch, it all felt like something more than animal instinct. Perhaps Eleanor had been right. Some creatures recognize pain when they see it, and some stay not because they have to, but because they choose to. Summer unfurled slowly, hot and golden. Shadow healed his gait stronger with each passing day, his coat now gleaming with the light of health. Emily, too, was transforming, her laughter easy, her voice louder, her questions endless. But peace has a way of stirring unrest in others. A flyer appeared on the post office door. "Town meeting. Wolf situation discussion." Mr. Henderson insisted they attend. "You have a right to speak," he told Jack, "even if some folks don't think so." The Pinerist Community Hall buzzed with murmurs and sweat. Ceiling fans groaned overhead. Jack, Sarah, and Emily slipped into a back row, eyes on them from all sides. Eleanor nodded once from across the aisle. Mayor Collins, round-faced and nervous, tried to open diplomatically. "Let's be civil, folks. This is a neighborly community." But the moment was short-lived. Frank Wilson stood. "There's a predator being kept like a pet, less than 2 miles from where kids play. It's reckless. It needs to end." Ripples of agreement murmured through the room. Jack stood. He's contained, monitored, recovering. He's not a threat. Today, maybe, Frank countered. But what happens when instincts take over? What happens when that wolf meets a child in the woods? He wouldn't hurt anyone, Emily said, her voice ringing clear. The room went silent. Frank softened his tone slightly, addressing her directly. "Sweetheart, I know you love him. But wolves aren't dogs. They're dangerous no matter how tame they seem." Others joined in. Mrs. Larson, the baker, mentioned livestock losses. "My cousin lost calves last spring. They kill without warning." Rachel Henderson. Lily's mother rose in defense. "So do bears, coyotes. But we coexist. Wolves belong here. They were here first." Frank pointed at the Thomases. "This isn't about wolf populations. This is about that wolf, living in a backyard like a golden retriever. This family doesn't understand the risk they're taking or forcing on us." Sarah felt the heat of judgment, the ache of injustice. Their private decision had turned into a public spectacle. Then Eleanor stood. "I've lived in these mountains longer than most of you have been alive," Eleanor said, her voice calm but commanding. The room quieted as though a wind had passed through. "I've seen what happens when wolves disappear. The forests grow sick. The balance collapses. Nature doesn't need our fear. It needs our humility." She turned to Frank. "Your hatred comes from loss. I understand. But this wolf," she gestured to the Thomases, "is not the enemy you're fighting." Frank's face darkened. "And you would know all about loss, wouldn't you?" A chill passed through the hall. There was something unspoken between them, a shared history neither was ready to voice. But Eleanor stood her ground. Yes. That's why I can say this with certainty: healing sometimes arrives in the form we fear most. She looked at Emily then. Sometimes what we fear is exactly what we need. The meeting ended with no clear decision. The mayor promised to consult state wildlife officials. The crowd dispersed in murmurs, half in anger, half in wonder. That night, Emily crawled into bed between her parents. For the first time since Michael's death, she sought their warmth, their closeness. They can't take Shadow away, can they? Jack wrapped his arms around her. We won't let that happen. But neither he nor Sarah knew how to keep such a promise. Days later, Shadow began pacing the fence line of his enclosure. Restless, anxious, watching the forest as if something unseen called to him. He needs more space, Eleanor said during her visit. His body is mending, but his spirit is trapped. Wolves weren't born to pace behind wire. What can we do? Sarah asked. Bring him to my land, Eleanor offered. I have 5 wooded acres. We'll build something bigger. He'll still be contained, but freer. They were stunned. Eleanor had kept distance for weeks. Now she was offering sanctuary. Why? Jack asked. Why take that on? Eleanor looked at Shadow, who had paused to watch her with quiet awareness. Because sometimes the universe gives us second chances. You don't waste them. 3 days later, the new enclosure was finished, a strong fence anchored deep in the soil, wrapping around groves of pine, and a spring-fed clearing. Shadow was moved carefully, and the change was immediate. He ran, limping still but joyfully. He marked trees. He chased a squirrel. He lay in dappled sunlight like a creature reborn. He's happier, Emily said. He's freer, Eleanor corrected, but still caught between 2 worlds. She glanced at Emily with a quiet, knowing sadness. Rather like some humans I've met. Summer deepened. The Thomases stayed. Jack extended his leave again. Sarah accepted local photo work weddings, family portraits under mountain skies. Emily made friends. Her days revolved around Shadow, but so did the families. Still, tensions smoldered in town. Frank Wilson had gathered signatures demanding Shadow's relocation to a sanctuary. In response, supporters circulated counter-petitions. The local newspaper ran dueling editorials. Even the church congregation split. This was never just about the wolf, Eleanor told Sarah one evening, as they sat watching Emily read to Shadow through the fence. It's about fear, about people who've never healed their own wounds. Shadow just brought it all to the surface. Before Sarah could respond, Shadow stiffened. A growl rumbled deep in his throat, low, primal. Emily inside. Now, Eleanor said sharply, rising faster than seemed possible. From the trees beyond the enclosure, a figure stepped into view. Frank Wilson, rifle in hand, eyes hard and unreadable. He stopped just short of the fence. Shadow paced, bristling. Came to see the miracle wolf for myself. Frank called voice, dripping with condescension. Quite the setup. You're trespassing, Jack said, stepping protectively in front of Sarah. Frank didn't move. Town council met yesterday. They're bringing in a state wildlife officer. Next week. Sarah's heart sank. She didn't need Eleanor to translate. Protocols would follow. Relocation, separation, loss. That's not necessary, she began. With all due respect, ma'am, Frank cut in. You're city folk playing with fire. That animal belongs in a facility or in the ground. Shadow didn't snarl. He simply stood between Frank and the porch, silent, watchful. You don't fool me, Frank said to the wolf. You're just waiting. Nature always wins. And with that, he turned and disappeared into the woods. They ate dinner in silence that night. Eleanor's cabin, once a haven, now felt shadowed by Frank's warning. If the officer says Shadow must be moved, Jack said, his voice tight, we might not have a choice. These laws are strict. We can't defy them. He's not just wildlife anymore. Sarah replied quietly. He's family. The word stunned her as she said it, but it rang true. Shadow had become the gravity around which their broken lives revolved. Not just Emily's salvation, but theirs too. Eleanor, uncharacteristically silent during the meal, finally set her teacup down with care. There is one way, she said, a legal path, but it demands commitment from all of you. They leaned in. You could apply for a wildlife rehabilitation license, she said. I held one for 20 years. I can sponsor your application, mentor you. It would let you keep Shadow and care for others like him. In Pittsburgh, Jack asked, stunned. You'd need land, Eleanor said. Fencing, resources. It would mean a total shift in your lives. This wouldn't be a summer project. It would become your purpose. The idea hung in the room like mist, unformed, but heavy with possibility. Through the window, they saw Emily reading aloud again. Shadow resting just beyond the chain link, listening. Sarah felt the weight of the summer, of everything Shadow had stirred awake. Emily's laughter, their marriage rediscovered. The possibility of hope, not built on forgetting, but on transforming pain. Jack rubbed his temple. It's massive, but it's something Sarah whispered. Time is short, Eleanor warned. Wildlife officers don't wait long. That night at the cabin, Emily fell asleep early, exhausted from the emotion of the day. Jack and Sarah sat on the porch beneath a sky dusted with stars. Crickets sang. Wind rustled softly through the pines. A sanctuary, Jack said, tasting the word. It doesn't sound like us, Sarah murmured. Maybe we're not the same people anymore. They sat in silence, the weight of the decision between them. But in their hearts, they already knew the wolf had led them here for a reason. And paths like this didn't come twice. The next morning, they began making calls. Sarah reached out to a conservation group Eleanor recommended. Jack scouted properties on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Quietly, deliberately, they started building the bones of a future they never imagined, one rooted in healing purpose and fur. Emily, unaware of the legal maze her parents were navigating, continued her quiet devotion to Shadow. She brushed his coat, read him stories, sat with him for hours, content simply to exist beside him. And Shadow, he changed too. He still favored his leg, but he now patrolled the perimeter of his wooded enclosure with grace. He responded to Emily's voice with a flick of his ears, a glance that lingered just long enough to feel like language. He was still wild, but something gentler had taken root in him. Frank didn't return, but others came, curious neighbors once skeptical, now cautiously intrigued. Lily's friends, a local teacher, even Mrs. Larson the baker who brought leftover pastries and asked hesitantly if she could see the wolf. And Eleanor, who had begun this journey as a recluse, became part of their family. She watched Emily and Shadow, like someone witnessing a second chance she never thought she'd see. One evening, as cicadas hummed and Emily dozed beside the enclosure, Eleanor spoke without looking up. You asked once why I had a wolf carved by my door, she said to Sarah. I had a son once. He was wild too. Died young. Never fit in this world. Sarah didn't speak, just reached over and took the old woman's hand. I wasn't ready to save him, Eleanor whispered. But maybe helping you. Maybe that's my chance to do better. In the distance, wolves howled again. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, but didn't rise. He listened, then laid back down beside Emily, resting his muzzle on her sleeping form through the fence. The choice had been made. He was staying. By August's end, their application was submitted. Eleanor's name carried weight. Her history, her license, her promise to mentor. That, combined with Jack and Sarah's commitment and Shadow's documented condition, was enough to begin the long process. They called the sanctuary Michael's Gate. It started with Shadow. But they would eventually care for others. injured birds, foxes, perhaps even another wolf one day. What once felt like a strange detour now revealed itself as a calling. Emily's transformation was undeniable. Her nightmares had faded. Her questions returned. She played, painted, laughed, everything she hadn't done since Michael passed. She still grieved, but she was no longer drowning in it. On their final day in Pinarest, the family stood at the edge of Eleanor's woods. The summer sun slanted low, turning pine needles gold. "Think he'll be okay on the ride?" Jack asked, adjusting the large travel kennel in the back of their new truck. "He's ready," Eleanor said. "And so are you." Emily knelt by the kennel door. Shadow walked in on his own, then turned and laid down, calm and watchful. She pressed her forehead gently to the metal grate. "I'll never let them take you again," she whispered. Eleanor hugged Sarah tightly. "Grief never leaves," she said, "but it can change shape." That wolf didn't just heal Emily. He reminded this whole place what compassion looks like. They pulled away slowly, tires crunching gravel. Locals watched from porches, not with suspicion now, but with wary respect. As the mountains shrank in the rear view, Shadow rested quietly. Emily leaned against the crate, humming to him. They had entered that forest a fractured family, drowning in a grief too large for words. They were leaving whole, not because the pain was gone, but because it had been seen, held, and transformed. And at the center of it all, a creature born wild, now tethered not by chains, but by love. A wolf who had once been left for dead, and who had repaid that kindness by saving them all.